Hello and welcome back to the Cookie Jar Golf Podcast. Bruce here, and in this episode I'm joined by Sam Williams and a very special guest, Peter Dawson. As many of you will know, Peter served as Secretary and later Chief Executive of the R&A from 1999 through to 2015, and we were lucky enough to visit St Andrews this past week to record this podcast with him. I first met Peter a few years ago when we struck up a conversation at the driving range, and I've gotten to know him a bit more since then. He's a terrific guy with a brilliant sense of humour and always very generous with his time, so it was a real privilege to sit down and chat to him about his career in golf. We hear about his introduction to the game, how the job at the R&A came about, the growth of the Open Championship, the wider responsibilities for the R&A in terms of governance and amateur golf, as well as golf's return to the Olympics during Peter's tenure as president of the International Golf Federation. So it's a wide-ranging discussion, and as you'll hear, Peter is a fantastic storyteller and kind enough to share with us some of the stories from over the years of witnessing great players up close and having a front row seat at some of the greatest championships in the game. So without further ado, let's jump right in, and I hope you enjoy the pod.
Watch this. No way!
Peter, thanks very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure, Bruce. Great to see you here in St Andrews.
Yeah, of course. Just here looking out across the old course where in a few months we'll be playing host to the 150th Open Championship. So I guess the town's starting to get that feel about it of building towards it, the Open, having kind of been waiting for an extra year, really, if you like.
Yes, it certainly is. You know, it's there's always a buzz when the Open comes to town, but it's the 150th playing this year, which gives it something extra.
A huge year, isn't it? It's going to be a very, very exciting year for the Open Championship.
Very exciting. I'm sure the R&A have all got all sorts of special events planned that some have been announced and some yet to be announced. But, well, you'll start to see grandstands going up in April, and it'll be full bore from there on, really, right up till the championship starts. And then some poor devils have got to come and take it all down again. But it comes down quicker than it goes up.
So you've obviously had an incredible career in golf, and I'd like to sort of unpack that if we can in some detail. But before we get into that, one burning question we did have is you've obviously been on that 18th green a number of times presenting the Claret Jug to the eventual winner. Is it Champion Golfer of the Year or Champion Golfer for the year?
Well, that's a very, very good question, because way back when I started at the R&A, I wasn't sure. And so I consulted my predecessor, Michael Benalek, who said, it's definitely of. So we played back every Open that he'd announced, and 50% were of and 50% were for. So that got me no further. And then there was a professor of English from Toronto University wrote in about it, and he thought it should be of. So we decided it should be of, and I said of every year, except when I played all mine back, I found I said for once way back really? Early on, but it's of. It's definitely of. Champion Golfer of the Year, winner of the gold medal, and Champion Golfer. You know, I still get people come up to me in the street occasionally with a father with a young boy, and they'll say, "Mr. Dawson, great to speak to you. Will you do it for little Johnny?" I know exactly what he means, but I pretend I don't. But I eventually, and Dad gets the phone out on video, and I say, "Ladies and gentlemen, with a score of 279, the winner of the gold medal and the Champion Golfer of the Year is Little Johnny," and off they go. It's fantastic.
See, that was one of my questions. I sort of woke up this morning, I knew we were recording this podcast, and thought, I'd love to know how it sounds with my name on the end of it. And I've got a feeling I can only dream. But
yeah, we'll have to save that for the end, I think, because neither of us are going to get there, but definitely want to hear those words, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Well, the way you're playing, Bruce, just carry on. Won't be long.
President's putter man, isn't he?
No,
match play specialist.
Winner and runner up.
If we can turn the Open Championship into match play, I think I'd probably wager a few quid on Bruce.
So moving on to the important stuff. What was your introduction to the game, Peter? How did you sort of first kind of get your first start?
I don't exactly remember the day that golf hit me, but it was in Edinburgh. I was a schoolboy there, and I was about 11 years old, and there's lots and lots of golf courses in Edinburgh. And I joined a club which was only about 10 minutes walk from where I lived with another school chum, and we just played away. And sadly, Lothian Burn's no longer with us. It was it closed down when golf was probably at its low point in the UK, and that's very sad to me. But it was £1 a year for junior subscriptions, or 6 old pence. That's 2.5p a round if you wanted to play a green fee. And so it wasn't an expensive game. And as soon as I started playing, the bug hit, and I just kept on. And 3 years later, I think it was, we moved away from Scotland down to Essex, and I joined Thorpe Hall there when, amazingly, Michael Benalek was at the peak of his powers. But we'll maybe talk a bit more about that later.
Wow.
It's amazing, isn't it? The Scottish game, I think, has it's just always is so much more accessible, isn't it, for people playing? And I think it's almost a rite of passage for a Scotsman, to play the game growing up. And you talk there about the cost of playing the game, and it's just such a key thing. And I think, to be fair, it's quite good across the whole of the UK in terms of price points for juniors even today. But you talk about there, it's like, how can you miss golf and the influence when it's 2p a round or whatever?
I know, and I think in many parts of England it's not that different, but it is, and Ireland, in fact. But it is in Scotland. It's the people's game, really. There's so many little courses in all the small towns and so on that it's very accessible, and that's why it's endured here. It began here, and it's enduring here. It's great.
So you had quite an accomplished junior career, if I'm right in saying that. And am I right in thinking, playing with the likes, you mentioned obviously Benalek, who was sort of the preeminent amateur of the day at that point, but also the likes of Peter Oosthuis and Peter Townsend, who are contemporaries of yours. Were you quite a keen sort of junior golfer?
Yeah, I was. I lived in the southeast at that time, and I won the Essex Boys Championship a couple of times, Essex Under-25, stuff like that. And when I went to bigger events, if you like, covering the southeast of England, and played alongside Peter Townsend, who to me was the most exciting golfer I'd ever seen. He was a couple of years older than me, but fantastic player when he was young. And Peter Oosthuis, who went on to do so well as a pro. And I never thought he'd be as good as Townsend, but he turned out to be better. And it's amazing how people develop in golf. But great people, old friends, people for a long, long time. And when I was 18, I went off to university, and it was a diet of match play golf and stuff. And I think my ability to put a whole round together rather deserted me. But they were good days too.
Was there ever a period where you thought, maybe playing the game for a living was ever on the cards? And where was the kind of turning moment in your head?
Well, I thought about it, and I fancied that maybe I hit the ball well enough, but I certainly didn't putt well enough. And I was doing fairly well at school and got into Cambridge, and glad I went that route, because I would have starved if I'd been a golf pro. I mean, there was no way I could have competed with these guys. And but it did cross my mind. Yeah. I loved the game, and I was fairly good at it without being exceptional.
And I guess always knew then you wanted to sort of maintain that proximity to golf then, but just maybe through a sort of more of a business pathway. Is that?
Yeah, I did everything young, I suppose. I got married young when I was 21, started working. The group I was working for took a big punt and made me managing director of one of their subsidiaries when I was 23 or 4. So the career went along, and the golf took a bit of a back seat. Tried to keep playing, played county golf for quite a few years. But came back into it later on when I joined the RNA and was on the Rules of Golf Committee. And then, of course, went to work in golf when I became secretary of the club and so on. But that's a whole different story.
So how did that job of secretary of the RNA sort of come about in 1999?
Well, Michael Benalek, my predecessor, decided it was time to retire, and the RNA started a search for the role. And one or two people, I was a member of the club, I was on the Rules of Golf Committee, and one or two people said to me, you should apply for this. I said, don't be daft. I've never worked in golf in my life. That's absurd. And then I thought more and more about it. We lived in Northumberland, and we were very happy there. My wife didn't particularly want to move, and my son kept saying to her, "Oh, let him apply. He'll never get it." And then I got to the last 12. "Don't worry, Mum. He'll never get it." Last 6. "This is not going to plan, James. He'll never get it." And then when I got it, he wanted to know if the job was hereditary, which I thought was quite funny. And no one more surprised than me to get the job. The final interviews were held at the Balmoral Hotel in Edinburgh.
Wow.
And there were 6 on the short list. And it was Monday morning, Monday afternoon, Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon. And so it was quite a grilling interview. I remember I was on last of the 6. And I remember I had the worst cold I've ever had. I was just streaming cold, and had to do a presentation on the future of amateur golf as part of the interview. So how I coughed and spluttered through that. And I remember Ian Webb, who was the chairman of the general committee of the R&A at the time, and there was a 5-man interview panel. And I walked in and sat down. He was looking at the papers, and he looked up at me and he said, "Do you think you've underachieved?" Well, that was a great question. So I thought, now the clever answer here is to say, "Yeah, but I'm here to do something about it." But I thought that might be a bit brash, so I said, "Yeah, well spotted." And on we went. So yeah, that was quite harrowing. That, and then a couple of days later, I got the phone call, and Ian was based in Belfast, and I went over there and we talked about it. And stranger than fiction, there I was. But I had a 3-4 month handover with Michael, and he went on to be captain. Thank goodness he did the 99 Carnoustie Open and I didn't.
I can imagine that was quite the introduction to it there.
Well, it was. It taught me a lot, actually, about how much you've got to keep on top of the venues and really be sure everything's just as it should be. So every year I spent a lot of time at the open venues and the planning and on the golf course stuff, much more than the logistics stuff.
And also the engraving of the claret jug, I guess, as well, because if you maybe think that the eventual winners.
Oh, that is the tensest moment of the year, because there's great pressure at the end of the Open for television and stuff to get on with the ceremony, and there's a temptation to unleash the engraver rather too early if you're not careful. Just in case, imagine if the guy who looks like winning takes 8 up the last, or there's some scorecard infringement. So you can't really unleash him too early. But I remember when I started at the R&A, the engraver. I'll tell you a bit of the history first of all about engraving the Open, because in days gone by it was the champion's responsibility to come back with the claret jug engraved the following year. And Fred Daly, in 1947, when he won it at Hoylake, he came back next year, and the claret jug had Holy Lake on it, not Hoylake, and it still does to this day. It's still got Holy Lake rather than Hoylake. And then Di Vincenzo, when he came back in 68 after winning in 67, he'd forgotten to have it engraved. And although it went on a couple more years, that was really the start of the engraver.
That was Hoylake as well, wasn't it?
That was Hoylake as well. Yeah. So I always told Hoylake how much of a part they had in the history of the engraver, and they didn't know it, and that was good. But there was a man called Alex Harvey who was put on, sadly died, but lovely guy, was put on engraving. And by the time I'd got to the R&A, Alex was getting pretty elderly, and I'm sure he wouldn't have minded me saying this. And I thought, goodness me, what if we lose Alex before the next Open or something? So I went on a search for an alternate engraver and found one in London. And I came back up to the R&A feeling, well, that's got that put to bed. Blow me, Alex is in the trophy room at the R&A alongside someone else engraving the club's trophies. And I said, who's that? Well, that's Alex's son, Gary. And Gary Harvey is a professional golfer and was a very good player, and he actually, very unusually, got into the final of the boys' championship twice. One time he was beaten, I think, by Howard Clark, and the next time he won it. And Gary Harvey engraved his own boys' championship trophy.
No way.
And Gary's the engraver to this day. Lovely people, and he's taken over from his dad. And yeah, wow. So the engraver's the sort of person that you get to know very well in those tense moments at the end of an Open.
I guess your first Open truly in charge in the new role would have been 2000 here 2000. At St Andrews, yes. In which Tiger sort of conquered all before him. I guess
in his pomp, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that must have been an incredible experience to just be at the helm.
It was. What a player he was, and I guess still is. But goodness me, he was in the middle of a fantastic run then, and he just spread eagled the field really as he had at the US Open too. And it was a great time to start really. Old course at St Andrews, best player in the world winning, and a great success.
When you were there, because I suppose I should know this given we're talking and doing this podcast, but your career and your role as secretary and chief executive of the R&A spanned for sort of 15, 16 years,
16 years.
I'm guessing predecessors again holding the appointments for similar length. When you took that over in 2000, Tiger's kind of right in his prime. Did you feel like actually we're at a real watershed moment in golf at that point, or did it just kind of see that almost in retrospect now? Did you sort of feel like 2000 like, crikey, this is going to change the face of the game here with the way Tiger's playing?
First of all, amazingly, each of my three predecessors did 16 years as well as I did for no connected reason. So we had 4 in a row doing 16 years at the helm there. And no, I don't think I was clever enough to think this is a watershed moment. In retrospect, it clearly was. But at the time, we'd come through the Palmer era, the Nicklaus era, the Seve, the Faudo, and Norman, and so on. And maybe at that point, Tiger was the next one of those. But he very quickly, I think, transcended that myself.
Because in that 12 months, a lot of the money had come into some of the professional game. And I think, looking at the money leaders for the year, I think 99 was Duval, I think, and that was sort of about 2 million, and then it jumps up to sort of 6.5 million with Woods that year, and it hasn't stayed the same. It's still grown, but it's not grown at that level. So clearly, that was the point at which all the purses and everything was sort of flooding into the game as part of that sort of Tiger boom.
Yes, and now of course he just got 8 million for
just for Instagram,
for publicity,
incredible,
which is pretty impressive.
Yeah,
but no, I got to know Tiger fairly well. I wouldn't say we were close friends by any stretch of the imagination, but always got on well. And he was someone I could ask an opinion about things from time to time, and found that relationship very useful. And I'm sure that went back to being in charge when he won his first Open Championship. And then he went on to win 2 more, St Andrews and Hoylake. I'm just amazed he didn't win more, actually, to be honest.
Yeah.
All of the champions that we've had in my time have really been, pretty good news people and good for the game. And I think the way that links golf has continued to produce, these very top players. You always get the odd exception, the odd surprise, but in general, they've produced a great run of winners, and I'm sure that'll carry on.
Are there any Opens that, maybe it's an unfair question, but are there any that stand out in the memory as being particularly sort of interesting or kind of nail-biting to watch, not necessarily just to spectate, but also from the sort of organisational perspective with, playoffs here and there and, high wins that sometimes you have to deal with that makes things interesting. Of course, the thing that players talk about so much with the Open, which is that how important the draw can be to their chances on the weekend.
Well, the draw that's true. You do get different weather, morning, afternoon, morning, tides come in and out, and so on. And there can be a bit of good or bad fortune attached to that. I think the most extreme weather we had when play went on was at Muirfield in was that 2003? I think 2.
Bruce, you're
2002.
usually false on this.
This when Ernie won in the playoff.
Yeah, people forget who was in that playoff. Actually, there were 4 players in there, and amazingly, in retrospect, the chairman of the championship committee at the time decided he'd play the playoff in 2 twos rather than a 4-ball, and his theory was it was just a continuation of what had happened on the day's play. So we put them out in 2 twos, and the great after dinner storyline is, of course, you can't play 4 balls in Muirfield on a Sunday, but that wasn't the reason. And
it would be great if it was the real reason. That would just be a legendary story.
It would be great stuff. And Ernie came through. And it was, what was it, Thomas LeVay, Steve Elkington and Stuart Appleby. Well, they made up the 4.
Amazing stuff.
But that weather, that very extreme weather, when I think Tiger failed to break 80 in it. But Ernie was out in in that kind of weather too. So he came through it.
When you look at the Open now, and I hate to use the word product, but if you look at it as the entertainment product and what it is, and the showcase for, one of the greatest tournament I believe in the game, radically different now to maybe where it would have been 25 years ago, and kind of obviously a lot of that's down to the work that you and your team will have done through your tenure. Was there a kind of conscious thought about where you see the Open Championship being, maybe when you step down from your role, or in 20 years' time, for instance?
Well, and it's continued to develop since I retired in 2015, and it's a significantly bigger event today than it was then, and every year it gets bigger. I think what the RNA has always tried to do, and still does, is on the one hand make it as pure a golf championship on traditional links courses as it possibly can, and preserve all those traditions, while at the same time capitalizing on it commercially, because the RNA uses its financial success to support the game in so many ways, and that's an important side of the RNA's work. So both aspects of the Open are very important, and I just think the way financially the Open's going with television money, merchandising, hospitality, etc. It'll be making a lot more money now than it did in my time, and in my time it made a lot more money than it did in Michael Benalek's. It's just the way it is, really. And I think the Open has, because you have to keep reinvesting in a championship, it's very important that it's a financial success year on year if it's going to keep up with the other big events in the game, and indeed other sports.
Commercially, it's an incredible beast, isn't it? Now it's an absolute powerhouse, and we're very fortunate getting to visit a lot of the great links around GB, and you see the impact this has, and the particularly in local communities. Port Rushford spring to mind has been a good example there, where town's just huge beneficiary of everything that goes.
Yeah, I was very pleased to get that agreed with Northern Ireland and Port Rush. That the agreement happened in my time, and delighted to see what a great success that first one was. Only the Irish could produce an Irish winner, if that's not a tautology or something. But amazing that Shane Lowry won that, and wow, it was a great success. I'm sure you
won't give anything away here, but there's always speculation in there about the sort of where the Open would potentially go in due course, and Wales obviously has never hosted an Open Championship. Does it go south of the border in Northern Ireland perhaps in years to come? And how global a product could the Open Championship be? I don't know. Penny for your thoughts there.
Well, it is the Open Championship. It has always been played on links courses in the United Kingdom, and I doubt if that'll change. Although the amateur has gone to the south of Ireland or the Republic of Ireland once or twice. Not for me to say. Will it go outside of the UK? I very much not in the foreseeable future. I wouldn't have thought, but it could, being the Open Championship. But I think it'll stick to links courses and these islands. As long as we're alive.
You mentioned when you took over the role, that presentation you gave about sort of the amateur game and the RNA's role in preserving that. How did that sort of brief evolve? Post 2004, when the RNA Limited was set up, and alongside all the, what we've talked about there with the Open and growing the scale of that, but also the RNA's responsibilities as sort of the governing body of the game, organizer of amateur championships all over the world, not just the amateur here in the UK, but things like the Asia Pacific. How did that sort of occupy your time during your role as chief exec?
Well, hugely. The amateur game is very, very important to the RNA, but of course the amateur game is very different now to what it used to be. There are very few full-time career amateurs anymore. Still a few, but very, very not many of them. And young players are getting better younger. They're getting better. They're better coached. They've got better equipment. They work harder at the game, and I've got no doubt that the vast majority of them fancy themselves as professionals, and that's their intention. So the RNA's recognised that, no question, and has promoted such things as the World Amateur Golf Ranking as a vehicle for amateurs to assess themselves and get into championships. The origin of that was in 2004, when at that time entry to the amateur championship was based on handicap, and the Australian amateur champion was balloted out
Really?
for being +1 or something in
Not good enough
Australia.
to play.
Not good enough. But the Australian handicap system was much more stringent than elsewhere. So we thought, oh, this is just dreadful. This can't be right. We've got to do something different. And a chap called David Moyer, who worked at the RNA, I think did more work than anyone to come up with the system. His son Grant still works there, quite famous in the world of rules. That's where it all started. And it's really taken root, hasn't it, around the world, the World Amateur Golf ranking in rating players and getting them into championship. But the RNA has developed amateur events hugely. Of course, since my time, it's taken on so many women's events as well, with the merger with the LGU, Ladies Golf Union, and alongside the USJ and Augusta National, things like the Asia Pacific Amateur, the Latin American Amateur, and so on. So it's using the success of the Open. That's just another example of financial success of the Open, to promote all these events and stage them on the best courses that they can find. And that'll continue. I think the rules of amateur status, which have been somewhat liberalised recently, are still important, because you don't want, do you, for the mass of golfers. When we talk at the top end, it's just a very small fraction. We don't want the mass of golfers competing for huge prizes and everything that would bring with it. I don't think, in my own opinion. So the rules of amateur status are important, but recognising that the amateur game is a route through to the top, where only a few could make it, of course. A lot of disappointed people, but that's the way of it.
The nature of amateur golf is it's very pure, isn't it? I think you talked about the Open Championship, and that has a purity to it. Amateur golf the same, and I think getting to watch things like the Walker Cup at Seminole, for example, on the TV, and seeing that as a on a platform to enjoy, I thought that was brilliant personally recently, and I think the more and more we do through Cookie Jar, the more we learn about the amateur game and start to see things. There's actually so much great stuff out there to see in the amateur the amateur game, and
there is. The Walker Cup is just a fabulous event.
It's a brilliant event, isn't it?
And to get so close to the players, and many of the matches walk the fairways with them is great, and it's played in such a good spirit. The wonderful story, isn't it, back when Bill Campbell was playing here on the Old Course, and his partner drove off, and the Americans made 4 to the Great Britain and Ireland's 5 on the first, and it was announced that Great Britain and Ireland were 1 up, and Bill Campbell had actually hit a practice putt on the putting green while his partner was driving off, and had therefore practiced during the hole and admitted it.
Really?
and he called it on himself. And that's the spirit the match is played, which is terrific.
Did you travel to a lot of the Walker Cups?
Yes, in my time, pretty much all of them, I think, yes.
Yeah.
Same spirit the world over. It's also a great meeting place between the RNA and the United States Golf Association, USGA. Meetings about rules, amateur status, equipment standards, all those kind of things.
Yeah, I was going to ask on
brilliant
that
segue
point.
for someone who's not done a podcast before that. That was a 10 out of 10 segue, I think, from Peter here into one of the talking points.
The collaboration though with the USGA and I guess Augusta National as well, in not just running events but the rules side of things. How's that sort of relationship between the RNA and the USGA?
Well, it's had its ups and downs, I'll be honest, but it's on much more level keel now than probably ever in the past. We didn't see a lot of things eye to eye back around 2000, in the early 2000s, but that's long in the past now, and work together, and there's good procedures and systems established to make sure that nothing is decided unless both sides or both parties are 100% happy. Augusta National are not directly involved in these things, though they are a major championship organizer, and we talk about those things, but it's very much the USGA and RNA on the rules, the governing bodies really side of things.
And you don't really sort of divide different aspects. You kind of co-chair all those different aspects together collectively, isn't it? Which must be quite difficult, I'm guessing, because the game in America is very different to the game in Britain, isn't it? I think.
Well, and you do
at a very
realise that you
fundamental
have to
level.
cater for these things. I remember there's a rule that you're not allowed to scratch the green or something way back, and I thought, well, what's that all about? And of course, it's all about nap on greens and things, and you don't think about it out here, but you do elsewhere.
Never seen in Britain, is it?
No, exactly. And so no, it works well, and decisions are taken, I think, collaboratively. There's a tendency for the Americans, or there was, to want to do things faster than the RNA wanted to, but I think that's in the past too.
I mean, American golf's always struck me for just having the kind of extremes almost at both ends of the spectrum, in that there's definitely a lot of people, friends from university, who would like that idea of just the country club atmosphere of maybe going and playing a few holes with a buggy and some music playing, which over here we might sort of frown at. But then there's equally quite a few sort of mid-amateur. I look at the mid-amateur circuit, for example, in America, which seems to be something that has been built up and really designed to try and protect the amateur game out there, and players like Stuart Hagestad, who get to play in the Masters, and they're almost different from the way the game's gone recently that you just mentioned, with young amateurs who are looking to turn professional. Seems like maybe over in the United States they're trying to hang on to the idea of having a kind of more of a career amateur golfer, or protecting that side of things.
And that goes through to senior level as well. I mean, senior amateurs in America, there's a lot of very, very good players.
Really?
Yeah, very good players in their sort of 50s and 60s and stuff, that you don't see here in the same quantity.
That's interesting.
And weather's got a lot
yeah.
to do with it. A lot of them live in Florida and places and play all year in those sort of conditions. But yes, I think it is true that in America they have maintained competitive golf at these higher ages. They're more than we have here, and you do see quite a number of reinstated amateurs who've tried to be pros in America, not still playing amateur golf later in life, which you don't tend to see here very much either. Not sure why, but it's a fair observation.
Mm.
What do you think are the sort of biggest changes you would say you've seen in the professional game? Just sort of circling back on that since you took over in the 1990s. I mean, we touched on some of these points earlier, with not just the size of the Open, but also, I guess, the way golf is kind of consumed at home with broadcasting, and also the growth of social media. Is that something that you kind of were beginning to wrestle with towards the end of your tenure at the RNA? I mean, social media is something that obviously we've been kind of huge beneficiaries of in recent times, but how do you see that kind of playing out?
Well, I don't think we were wrestling with it. I think it was a good development to bring the game in so many different ways to a wider and wider audience, and I think that was just to be welcomed. How you, as a championship organizer, you've got to try to be sure that everything can be monetized, if I can use that word. I mean, you wouldn't want your television revenues to fall away and no social media revenues build up, because they are quite different models. So to that degree, one had to be a bit protective and so on. But no, it's great that golf is brought to such a wide audience. I think in the playing of the game, well, it keeps moving on, doesn't it? They get bigger, stronger, better, longer hitters. The equipment debate will rage and so on.
Won't go anywhere, that debate, will it?
Who knows? Everyone's got their own point of view, and I don't know. It's a tough one for the governing bodies, and if they choose to do something, if they choose not to, they'll deserve our fullest support, because it's tough. But the game is ever more popular. The best players, if you like, are still winning. Yes, they're hitting more wedge shots than players before, and less 2-irons, but they can hit 2-irons when they have to. And I don't deny that I personally prefer to see bigger clubs hit to greens more often, but equally I'd be dead against splitting the rules. That's a personal view. But whatever is decided will have been thought through very carefully, I'm sure.
It's very easy to criticise, the kind of current bomb and gouge way of playing, and you see people like Bryson DeChambeau be the obvious people to mention, but they're all big, huge hitters. We're sat above the second hole on the old course. There's a little bit of you worry about maybe the links golf and some of the British classics and their place in, maybe the Open Championship in the next 50 years if the equipment stuff goes unchecked? Or
well, the equipment stuff is checked. I mean, there is nothing that's come out on equipment, despite what you might hear marketing-wise, that has increased hitting distance significantly for close on 20 years now.
Yeah.
But the players are getting bigger, they're better coached, they're fitter, they work harder, and no doubt as a result the ball will be hit further. The limits in the rules on the ball and the clubs are, the manufacturers are right at the limits of those, and have been for some time. So coming back to your question, links golf has always been very weather dependent, and on the old course here, I always thought, for example, you could make it at least 6 shots harder with one set of hole locations compared with easier ones. I still think that's the case. So there are things you can do to make it a good test. And I think up until now, it certainly links golf on our best links has continued to be a great test. And the players don't come and kill them. Although if you've got a flat, calm day after a wet fortnight, no doubt they will score very low.
Yeah.
Does that matter? I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the importance of the weather there and how that's actually something that seems to be embraced now increasingly by American professionals who are travelling over, and certainly just looking back at Royal St George's of last year, and whether maybe that was partly influenced by the fact there was a year away from the Open for a lot of these pros, but the incredible praise that they were lauding on the course and the championship for just being a completely different style of golf to what they've played in the United States. And I think it just naturally begs the question as to whether there's scope for more championships at the top end, the professional level. In the UK on some of these historic links courses. Obviously there has been some collaboration between the European Tour and the PGA Tour on things like the Genesis Scottish Open, for example. But I wonder if there's something that can be done there in the future to maybe, as you say, bring more links courses sort of back into the
Well,
fold.
I was very pleased to see the reaction to Royal St George's last time, because it hadn't been a favourite of the players for quite some time, but I think the setup was really good. I can't deny, I don't know what the attitude in the RNA is now. I can't deny that there was a tendency when I was there to keep the Open venues special for the Open and not have them used regularly, although the Dunhill has come to Carnoustie and the Old Course very regularly. That's the exception. I remember the Scottish Open being at Carnoustie and so on, things like that. PGA, I think Arnold Palmer won the PGA, the British one, at St George's, actually, didn't he? A long time ago, I think.
Really?
I think so. So it's got a history to it, and I think we would like to see links golf supported by the pro game, but there's a lot in that commercially that's not easy to put together necessarily. And, I think the players love coming to links courses. I remember, can't remember now if it was 2015 or 2010, but it was a practice round day at the Open, and John Daly was wandering down the first fairway in a 4-ball, and I was going past in a cart. He looked around, and I heard him say to his players, the guys he was playing with, as he looked around, "God, this is it. Doesn't get better than this, does it?" And I thought, well, wow, that's an accolade.
Yeah,
John Daly, and made me feel pretty good about links golf, to be honest, and its attraction. I've not forgotten that.
I guess you hear that sentiment quite often, though. I mean, amongst a lot of the players who no doubt you spent a fair bit of time with over the years at the Open. I imagine that sentiment's fairly commonly held.
I think it is. I think the people who have been around think about the game, think about how it can be played differently, and so on. Love the challenge of links, which is different to the target golf. Perhaps they get more often than they'd like.
Is there a favourite Open Championship memory? There's probably been so many.
Well,
there's got to be some good stories in those years.
I'm often asked this question, and my favourite Open Championship memory goes way back, long before I was at the RNA.
Really?
Yeah, and I was in 1969. I was just finishing at university, and it had been so long since there's been a British winner of the Open, and we'd been told we were pretty useless compared with the Australians and the Americans and all this. And suddenly, Jacqueline won, and that was a magical moment. It was almost like being liberated. God, we aren't so bad after all, you know. And that was the start of the European Renaissance in golf. I've no doubt of it. And not a dry eye in the house, really. It was a great moment. Because it had been so long. You had to go back to 1951 when Max Faulkner won to find another British winner. And if you'd grown up in golf in that period, it was quite easy to have an inferiority complex and so on. Of course,
we still carry that with us a bit today, don't we?
Yeah. You know. One thing we haven't touched on, I remember, is, of course, when I started to play as a boy, it was the small ball, the 1.62. And that's only really changed for me, I suppose, in the early 70s, really. Although the rule didn't actually force the small ball out until the 1990s. You could still play it, but, medals and tournaments were being played with the small ball in the 60s. And I honestly can hardly remember it now. The British manufacturers, it was pretty clear to me, didn't want to change to the 1.68. And the 1.68s that they produced at that time went nowhere. It was like hitting a pudding. And when I was at university at Cambridge, and Leonard Crawley, who was our mentor there, had been to America, came back with a bucket full of Titleist big balls, and he realised, these aren't so bad after all, that we made the switch. But it was quite a change, I suppose. Although you quite quickly got used to it. It was certainly a lot easier to chip and, I don't know about putt with, but certainly to pick up chip shots than the small ball was.
I'm right in saying the pros for a while had to play the big ball and the amateurs played the small ball. So
the big ball was never outlawed because it was the 1.62 was a minimum dimension in the rules, so you could play at 1.68.
Yes,
if you wanted. But in windy weather or whatever, I guess the marble was the better one to play. Although I can really hardly remember knowing what the difference was.
Yeah, I've seen from some people saying it went considerably further, the smaller ball, and as you mentioned there, like, as the nickname suggests, it's a giveaway. Yeah, but and probably better in the wind too. But
I would think so. But it's so hard to remember. I think I do remember feeling that the big ball soared into the wind a lot more than the small one, but soon had to get used to it.
Funny that you think that you mentioned about that British inferiority complex, just coming back to it, and you do think about the 150th this year, and you think that'd just be absolutely brilliant, wouldn't it, if we could have someone from Britain that could win that. And remarkable stuff, really. Yeah. Just sort of some other kind of tournament memories. I think before we started rolling into it, we talked a little bit about Augusta National and some of the time spent over there. I'd be curious to know about some of your Masters memories there.
Well, the Masters is all the major championships have a different feel to them, a different character, and Augusta very much has its own character. It's not unlike Wimbledon in a way in tennis. It's got that similar atmosphere about it, and very well organised on an iconic golf course. And one of the great advantages, if you like, that the Masters have, it's played on the same course every year. So on television, people know the course, etc., which they don't necessarily at a US Open or even an Open Championship to the same degree. And so it's very popular. It's almost the start of the golf season here, isn't it? So not quite true, but it almost, once the Masters is over,
I think that's the curtain raiser in Britain,
you see tourists flocking to St Andrews. It's probably just the time of year, really, but then they come along. And I was fortunate to be a referee at the Masters, I think, every year between 2000 and maybe 2019 or so. So, and it's quite high pressure, I suppose, being a referee if something happens, but quite often nothing happens. And,
is it the same format as? Correct me if I'm wrong, but with the Open, the referee will be designated with a group, and you'll follow the group round.
At Augusta, you're put on a hole.
Right. Okay.
And it's a very highly refereed event, although the referees hold back. And you're put on a hole, different hole each day probably. And if there's three of you on a hole, you probably interchange positions. And so on. But my story that I bored everyone with for so long is when Tiger chipped in on the 16th, famously, in 05, I think it was, and then the Nike swoosh falls into the hole. I was probably the closest person in the world to him when he hit that shot, because I was the referee on the hole and had to move my chair when his tee shot was in the air as it landed where I was sitting. And people don't remember this, but the ball was right up against the collar of rough. So his club had to go through that collar, strike the ball up the green and roll back into the hole. And he's got a big picture behind his desk, Tiger, of the whole world going berserk, including him, and one person, deadpan, me, watching this. And he sent me a copy of this, Get a Little Excitement in Your Life. And I've got that one upstairs in my study. Yeah, Stoicism. Yeah. And he remembers it, but he told that story amazingly at a recent Masters press conference. So I'll never forget that. It was really quite funny. Had the picture been taken a couple of seconds later, I was jumping up and down too. But I'm not telling anyone that. Although I just did.
It'll always go down in history as one of the most iconic shots in golf that will ever be played. And you've got a front row seat for it there, and you've sounds like you've really contained your excitement there beyond a level that I would have been capable of. Did it have like a different energy in the air?
I kind of felt, as referee, you're not supposed to leap up and down. In favour of one player. But it was the only time, I can remember when Tiger seemed to lose concentration, because he then bogeyed the next two holes, and you could see on the 17th tee he was still
a bit too charged up.
And then eventually won the Masters in a playoff that year, I think, didn't he?
Yeah, that's right. Yes, Chris DeMarco.
Chris DeMarco. So I'd stood there or sat there in my rules position, watched tee shot after tee shot come in, hit the green and roll back down towards the hole. And from where I was sitting, you couldn't tell from the side if they were going to go in or not, but he knew it was going in. No question.
Really?
No question, he knew.
Yeah, his eyes when he chips it, it's laser focused, isn't it? So.
And he's been there. People compare different eras, and all you can be is the best of your time, and he was certainly the best of his time.
I guess with having seen him up close so often, things that I've only sort of seen him from 100 yards away once in 2010 when I was sort of 15 years old and maybe couldn't quite sort of soak it all in, but the sort of the stories that we hear about being able to hear the kind of Tiger roars echoing throughout the course, and the size of the galleries that he would attract. I guess being a referee up close there on a hole like 16 and just seeing the sort of change in atmosphere when he comes along is pretty remarkable.
It's very noticeable. I remember when the Open was at Turnberry one year, and Ryo Ishikawa was very popular in Japan as a player. I think they called him the Prince, didn't they? Under some pressure from Japanese media, amazingly the computerized draw brought him together with Tiger Woods. And I've never seen so many media follow a group at the Open in my life.
Really?
It was really tough to control. Japanese media were out in millions.
Just not understanding the protocol at all.
No,
just going crazy.
They were so excited about it.
The excitement levels are off the charts.
And Japanese TV ratings through the roof and things. So, all these things are factored into the draw.
When you get to an Open week like that, would you kind of feel a sense of nervousness? I mean, as things were building in scale, as you mentioned at the start of the podcast, you see the grandstands going up. You think about the size of the galleries and how you're going to manage. I mean, I guess it's common now at certain venues.
As time went by, I think one got more and more confident about it, but there was always a bit of apprehension as to what was going to happen and so on. I think that much of the apprehension I had was about the weather. Not just whether it was going to be bad on the championship days, but could we keep the course firm and fast? Would the rain keep off and all that kind of thing was always a bit of a worry. But, you had to play with what you got. And it's a very well-oiled machine now, setting up the Open. And every year it expands and grows. I'd be very interested to see. I mean, for example, this year is the first time there's been a ballot for tickets, and you can't pay on the gate. So it'd be quite interesting to see how that worked. And I think we're going to see a very big crowd, very big.
Talking about growing the game, sort of the wider discussion around that. Obviously, one of your other very important roles was as president of the International Golf Federation, which helped secure golf's reintroduction to the Olympics in Rio in 2016. How did that come about?
Well, it was a long process, and there were many people in golf, of course, who quite understandably said, look, the major championships, and we must remember to talk about the women's game and all this too. The major championships are the pinnacle of golf. Golf doesn't need the Olympics, etc. But at the same time, there were so many smaller countries in golf who said, look, if golf was an Olympic sport, it would absolutely be a game changer in our country, for publicity, for the game, for government support, and all of that. And in the end, those voices, began to mean more and more and more. And we thought, well, we'll go for this. And we had a false start. A pretty poor presentation back in 2003, I think it was, or 2002. But for the Olympics always works 7 years ahead. So golf was actually accepted into the Olympics at the IOC session in Copenhagen in 2009 for the 2016 Olympics in Rio. And we were ready for it. And we took with us to the final presentations. Padraig Harrington came. Suzanne Petterson, Michelle Wee, and Matteo Manacera were our team, and Ty Votor from the PGA Tour and myself. Ty was vice president of the IGF, and we had a consultant helping us, very experienced Olympic guy, as to how we should make this presentation. And the presentation was to be on a Saturday morning, and quite late on Friday night, when we were rehearsing what we had to do, he said, I think we should do the first bit of this in French, because the Olympic languages are English and French. And he thought, that will get you more votes, if you do this in French. Well, Ty Votor was due to do this first part. Well, he was out of the room, down the corridor. You couldn't see him for dust. And I had to do the French bit, which was quite harrowing, actually, I must say, but got through it. And Michelle Wee was astonishing, because the consultant had prepared a document that she should speak to and what she was going to say, and she looked at it, put it down, and was word perfect.
Incredible.
Must have had some sort of photographic memory. Astonishing.
Yeah.
And Matteo Manacera, who at that time I think was 16 years old, and I think had just won the amateur. I think I'm right there. He stood up age 16 in front of a huge crowd of people and gave a 2-minute thing, not in his first language, mind, in English. He's Italian. And they did wonderfully well, all four of them. Padraig and Suzanne too, and that helped us. And we were voted in for Rio. And then, of course, in a sense, Rio had only just been elected the host city 2 days before. So their bid for the Olympics didn't include golf, because they didn't know golf was going to be in it. It was quite an odd sequence, that. And of course, there wasn't a golf course in Rio that was really up to the task of the modern professional. So we had to build on and start that from scratch, and find the land and get all the ecological permissions and so on, and find an architect. And Gil Hans was chosen, and he did a terrific job building that course. And I think I'm right in saying it's the only Olympic venue in Rio that's still in daily use down there.
Is that right? So
I think so. I'm not as close to it as I was, but that was certainly true a couple of years ago.
I think that's the great thing about golf is, it's a playing pitch that can be used at a professional event one week and then out on the course today. Whereas, you look at the stadia and infrastructure, it's just white elephants, isn't it, a lot of the time? And how on earth do you use those after the Olympics has gone away, So
golf, amazingly, well, it was first in the Olympics in 1900, and then in 1904, and fell away. And it was one of the very few sports then to be played by men and women in the games. And then, for reasons we never really got to the bottom of, it didn't get played in 2008 in London, and then wasn't played right up until Rio.
I never quite understand, and I should know this, but I never fully understand the mix between amateur and professional sports within the Olympic context. And was there ever a discussion about whether golf coming back into the Olympics should have been at an amateur
there were
level
many
versus
people
professional?
thought that, but those people were not up to date with the Olympics. I mean, we don't think Usain Bolt was an amateur.
they're
do we?
professional athletes, aren't
They're
they?
professional athletes, and the Olympics movement wanted the best athletes in the world. They wanted Tiger Woods or whoever. Tiger couldn't play because of injury and so on. But no, that was old hat. I think only boxing did that apply, amateur boxing as opposed to professional. And of course, it was supported very well by the women golfers. Almost 100%, went there, wanted it. Some of the top men didn't want to play, but that improved in Tokyo. And if you look at tennis, which got into the Olympics in the 80s, it was quite a while before all the top players played there. Sampras didn't play for 2 or 3 Olympics, I don't think. I think it's very well established now on the Olympic firmament. It's widened golf's competitive landscape. For 4 years, Justin Rose on the tee was announced as the Olympic champion.
Yeah, that's great.
He was pretty pleased. What an ambassador he was for Olympic golf. We had a press conference the morning after he won the men's event, and the easiest press conference I ever did because no one asked me anything. It was just Justin. And every question that was asked, I thought, well, the perfect answer to this is, and Justin would give it or better. He was just fantastic. Great ambassador for it. But the support we got from the women's game was huge as well. And great podium of medal winners, both for the men's and women's events. Yeah,
I mean, we obviously hear the expression a lot now about growing the game in golf, which I think, although the sentiment's right, maybe the terminology's kind of overused, but it's kind of by the by because what it's driving at is really, really important for golf, I think, and it's something that we've seen coming through the pandemic is how much participation's increased, and you look at events like the Olympics, and it seems that they're absolutely critical for growing, participation in the game. And although I guess the concerns around Zika virus and maybe the sort of tepid uptake by a few of the top pros to begin with, actually to hear someone like Rory McIlroy, who was initially a bit reluctant to say that he's never tried so hard to finish third in his life in Tokyo, and see Morikawa there as Open champion, it seems like it's becoming firmly established as a.
Yeah, I think as well the top golfers appreciate the experience that they don't otherwise get of mixing with the top players from other sports and realise what they have to do to get to the top of their events and so on. A number of the top players said that to me. God, what these people have to go through, be it a weightlifter or a gymnast or whatever. I remember Justin saying that he was astonished about how noisy it was at a gymnastics event. And if it was that noisy in golf, they couldn't play. Yet these gymnasts are supposed to go through their routines with all this background noise going on. How do they do it? So, they learned from it, I think, and appreciated it, enjoyed it too.
Is golf a global enough game at the moment? Do you think do you think there's enough interest around the world? Do you think, how does some of the stuff that's now on the table with perhaps professional golf, Premier Golf League, Saudi Golf League, some of the breakaway tours there, maybe looking at events in different countries. How does that all come together in maybe broadening appeal of the game around the globe, and where does that all end up, do you think? I know it's a broad question, but
I think golf has and golf getting into the Olympics added, I think, 31 national golf associations to the list. Who suddenly got affiliated because golf was in the Olympics. And that's not to say that meant that golf was booming in those countries. It wasn't, but at least it got some infrastructure started. And so I think the expansion of the game to other countries will just naturally come as countries develop, and both economically and socially and so on. Breakaway leagues, I don't know. Obviously, with my world rankings hat on, one has to look at these things fairly and dispassionately as when they come along. Right now, I don't know anything about players. I don't know anything about venues. I don't know anything about schedules. It's just conversation to me, and I don't know where it'll go. It's for others to.
There's so much speculation and hype, isn't there? And it feels like there's just so much on the rumour mill with player X, Y, and Z has made an agreement in principle, but it all seems to have, in the last few weeks, died away a little bit. But I do, I think at the very least there's always, some merit in changing, taking events to places they may not have been before, or just the concept of certain events. I think sometimes 72 hole stroke play can feel a little tiring at times, and seeing a bit of a change around on some of that. But like you say, it's crystal ball really, and no one seems to know where it'll end up in due course.
No, I think that's right. Time will tell. I can't forecast, and I'm not, to be honest, close enough to it to comment. It does seem to ebb and flow. I'm sure the PGA Tour, and by the way, I must say that the PGA Tour and the European Tour who had a bit of a harder job about this because of the international nature of the tour, came through the COVID pandemic and the lockdown amazingly well, and provided playing opportunities for their members. I thought that was really strong, and the Asian Tour unfortunately wasn't able to do that quite so well, so it had a bad couple of years. And I'm sure the PGA Tour have been very heartened by the supportive statements they've had from so many players recently. So I don't know where this goes. I'm sure the people in charge now are dealing with it in the best way they know. We'll just have to see.
Yeah, diving into the official world golf ranking a little bit more, I mean, because that itself has undergone some changes in the last year or so, and changes that are, I guess, being introduced, and further changes that will be introduced in the coming years in terms of ranking points and how strength of field's assessed. And I guess, that's all designed to maybe level the playing field a little bit with the number of different tours there are out there, and having some sense of a comparison. What's it been like sort of in those discussions there when you're looking at a lot of these themes that we've talked about in the podcast, the growth of the professional game, the proliferation of a number of different tours out there? How's that process played out?
Well, the growth of the game and the increasing number of tours and tournaments, in a sense, makes a world ranking system more difficult. Because how do you assess how a player in Japan who only plays in Japan compares with a player in America who perhaps only plays in America, and so on? It is quite difficult. But mathematically, and there are enough data points out there to conduct these statistical comparisons, and there is a new ranking system coming in August of this year, which is a result of an in-depth mathematical analysis of the existing system. And the existing system did find some bias. The analysis did find some bias with the existing system, and it's those biases that are basically being corrected in the new one.
Is this the migration to the strokes gained approach?
Yes.
Being the key metric for?
Yeah, yes, it is.
And strength of field will still continue to be a leading driver of how many points are up for grabs within those.
Very much.
Because I mean, strength of field is just everything to these guys, isn't it? Really, that they're playing. I mean,
it is. But what we do have in the existing system is tour minimums and flagship events which get more points, and it's those things largely, not only, but those things largely that cause the bias, and they're going to be eliminated in the new system. Now, some people might say, well, won't that make it more difficult for a player from a lesser tour, if I can use that expression, to get ahead? And the answer is, well, that might be, but I think it's a matter for the tours to find pathways, not a matter for the world ranking system to find pathways. And we're hanging our hat on that, and the tours will respond to that, I'm quite sure.
Because the world ranking system should just be an objective way of assessing player ability in a given moment, right? The tours should be able to provide, like you say, the pathway and the progression, and make sure that new talent emerges and that legacies are kept and all that sort of good stuff, I think.
Absolutely. That's where we are with that. And the women's ranking, of course, is looking hard at what we're doing in the men's. And
do they mirror the same approach, or is that
not exactly, but pretty
different?
close. They perhaps do have a greater concentration of where the top players are playing than the men's, slightly. And they provide, I think, a pretty accurate ranking. But I'm sure they'll look at what the men's ranking's doing and see. And it's quite interesting that we're using a lot of the work that the RNA have done on the world amateur ranking as a part of this new system.
Is that right, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because that is a much more diverse ranking than the professional one, because it covers so many more players who will never play against each other around the world. The New South Wales amateur, you might never see some of those players again anywhere else.
And a lot of it's match play, and it's disparate fields, random course setups,
etc., etc.
Yeah, I mean that covers such a huge array of events. I mean, even playing university golf, having some events that are designated a sort of a D category or so, and then you have the Bs and the As and the elites, and I guess being able to cater to all those different strengths of field and different climates, different kind of events, stroke play, match play, and so on. Really quite an achievement to try and bring all of that together into one amateur ranking.
Wouldn't bother you though, as you only play in the A's.
I only play match play. I won't put my name into any sort of stroke play event.
Are you going to start picking up some Wagger points, Bruce? The road to Cyprus 25 is on for you, is it now?
Definitely not.
I would really like that if you get to Cyprus point 25.
Circling back on the Open and the R&A, the women's game, I think it seems to have gone from strength to strength in recent years, and it seems that the ladies' British Open has really been embraced in recent years by a lot of the top professionals, when that maybe wasn't necessarily the case. And it seems that the sort of majors in the women's game have maybe been a bit more fluid and a bit more dependent on certain sponsors here and there. But how do you see the sort of women's game going forward and then closing that gap with the men's game?
Well, it's probably the biggest potential growth area, isn't it, in golf? More and more women are starting to play, and more and more will come. I think since the merger with the LGU, the R&A have really embraced their role in the women's game, and they've moved the events that they're responsible for right up in terms of standard and how they're run and who comes and plays in them and so on. That's great. And the R&A's Women's in Golf's charter and all the things they're doing to try to encourage family golf and so on will bear fruit, I'm sure. It's good to see, quite honestly. And don't you think, I think now that the women's game is more exposed on television perhaps than it was, it's certainly in Britain, that a lot of amateur golfers find it easier to relate to when they're watching it. And they still love to watch the men, of course, and good they are.
But it's a different game when you watch the top flight professional game. It's a different game they're playing, and I don't think any amateurs really can identify to it. I think you can watch the ladies, and you can to an extent identify.
Yes, I think you can.
And I mean that not in a critical way.
And some of the top women now are really, really, really good players and respond really well under pressure. That J.Y. Coe, isn't it? She's a fantastic player under pressure. And I've never seen a putter like Inbee Park.
And the hosting potential is huge, because you can have some of these great American Golden Age classics that are I hate to say it, largely redundant for the top 50 players in the world today, just purely on distance. So the opportunity to have more events. I think they're taking the Curtis Cup, for example, is going to Merion, I think, isn't it, in a year or two's time or something like that. So all of these events can start to happen at places that you maybe don't get to see as a showcase very often, which I think is great.
Well, Merion's an ideal length, I would think, for Curtis Cup. So and they squeezed the US Open in there not so long ago. Yeah,
true. Of course.
Which was that was Justin's.
It's a bad example, Mary, but you know what I'm talking about. I think you can have, and I think that's great.
Yes, and I think it's great that the open venues will be used for the women's game, and some of them I think lend themselves to it very well. Muirfield's a classic example. It's always in great condition, Muirfield, and I played over there with a woman professional called Sarah Kemp. She's Australian. Good player, and she was very keen to play there, and we had a game, and she knocked it round 72, no problem, from the men's medal tee without holding anything, and you'll see some great scoring, I'm quite sure.
What do they say? They can have an open at a week's notice at Muirfield, can't they?
That's almost true if you didn't have to build grandstands, but from a course condition. Carnoustie's the same. Carnoustie's always in great shape. The East Coast courses have a bit of a longer season than the West. They don't seem to be quite as wet and soft in the early part of the season. But no, Muirfield and Carnoustie have always been outstanding in condition, as is the old course most of the time. But it gets so much play, and you've got to be careful with it.
I mean, We're obviously huge golf course perverts, aren't we, on this podcast? And we're hugely into architecture and golf travel and stuff. You've played a lot of golf. You've travelled all over the place. Where are some of the real favourites that you've got to see on your travels?
Goodness me!
I know you'll be really modest here as well, but I really encourage you not to be in 5 minutes.
I think if you talk about the open venues first of all, do I have a favourite? No, I don't, because they're all favourites in different ways. St Andrews certainly for atmosphere, Muirfield because of it's perhaps what you see is what you get type of thing. Carnoustie because it's so difficult and so on. I think the new layout at Turnberry is phenomenal.
Really?
Yeah. I was actually involved in doing that with Martin Ebert and indeed Mr. Trump, and that was good fun. But I think the outcome is terrific. I think that's a great course. Love Portrush, marvellous. Go wider afield. Always enjoy a trip to Pine Valley. That's sensational. But a great favourite of mine is where the Walker Cup was played back in 2001 at Ocean Forest in Sea Island, Georgia. That's, I think, a fantastic layout.
Sea Island's quite a big pro player hangout, isn't it? Is that right?
It is. Huge number of them are there. Kuchar, Zach Johnson, Davis Love, Jonathan Bird. Quite a few. There'll be some I've missed out there.
Ocean Forest, and that you just a really good book. So it's not somewhere. Obviously, Pine Valley is somewhere you hear so much about.
Yeah.
And, it's never short of hyperbole. But Ocean Forest is one that very special place.
It's a beautiful course, and it's in marshland and so on. And there's a lot of water on it, but it's just a great layout and always in great shape. But there are many courses around the world that I haven't been near. I'm sure.
Are there any places
Sandbelt courses in Melbourne, of course, are very special.
You've done quite a bit of the Sandbelt, have you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, Royal Melbourne, Kingston Heath, Victoria, all these places are great courses and very natural as well. Just bunkers just cut out of the fairways.
Yeah, it's amazing how they do that. You don't see much of that anywhere else. That sort of very sharp edging of bunkers around the greens.
No,
because I think it must be underpinned quite heavily with the.
Someone told me they stopped taking trolleys over the greens down there now.
Really?
I don't know if that's true, but.
Yeah, that always used to be the case.
Yeah.
The big sort of wheel trolleys just taking it.
It really speeded up play.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying, I know this is just going off complete tangent here, but obviously you mentioned Melbourne Sandbelt there. Mackenzie had a huge influence with the course design out there. As Secretary and Chief Executive of the R&A, you have the Mackenzie old course map in your office. Is that right?
I did have, yes. I think it's been moved elsewhere in the clubhouse now.
Has it?
Yeah.
Is that quite a sort of special little piece that sort of?
Yeah, I always enjoyed sitting under that. And you keep referring to it. What's that bunker called? Oh yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And, no, great stuff. And one of the things, I don't know why this has just come to mind. It must be something to do with talking about Australia. When distance measuring devices came along, and we had to consider those, I was a bit anti them actually, because I couldn't.
Really?
Yeah, because I couldn't really see where this would end. If a distance measuring device is okay, what about a wind meter? What about an altitude meter? And it's easier to say we'll have none of them than you'll have one, and so on.
You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, can you? Very easily.
And anyway, but this is long since past. But I remember there was a huge debate about whether they would speed up play or not. That was it. It was the speed up play connection with what it was before. And are these things going to make play faster or not? And there was a wonderful moment in the big room at the R&A when one of our members, who's also a member at another club, this is an anti-Scottish story, this one, said, well, they don't speed up play at our club. And I said, why is that, Jim? And he said, because 4 of us share one. Which I thought was a tremendous moment in the annals of distance measuring devices.
You must have so many stories.
Lots of stories, I suppose, over the years, and lots of people that I never dreamt I would meet, that I have met through golf. Before I got the R&A job, I never thought I'd ever have lunch with Clint Eastwood, but I did.
Really?
Yeah. So he came to the R&A. People come through the R&A. Bill Clinton, F.W. de Klerk, all these people. They all want to come in the clubhouse.
And you just get a sort of special, sort of just pops upstairs and said, well, we've got couple of...
Well, yeah, Bill...
Do you want to pop down and say hi? Well, yes, I'd quite like to say hi to Bill Clinton.
That sort of
actually.
thing. And I had 20 minutes with him one-on-one in the trophy room at the RNA, and his knowledge of the history of golf was extraordinary.
Really?
Absolutely.
Bill Clinton?
Absolutely
Yeah.
extraordinary. And that was good. And the presidents of the USA and first
Did you
ministers
have a
of
little
Scotland
sort
and
of
so on.
MO with it all, where if someone was coming, you thought, well, I've got a little trail, I'll sort of show them around the big room, and then I'll sort of take them into the library or anything of that sort of stuff. Did you have like a little thing where you gave them a little tour, or you sort of like took them to a certain table, or
just in your
put them
mind,
in a certain
really.
spot?
I remember when Bill came in, Bill Clinton, I knew that the Friday night drinking gang in the RNA, just some of the older local members would go in for an hour about 6 o'clock. And I knew Bill would be coming in, and I knew he wouldn't have a tie on, which you have to be, even today, to be in the big room at the RNA. And I knew I was going to take him in the big room, so I thought, I don't want any trouble here. So I went to these guys, now, look, fellas, going to have Bill Clinton coming in here in a minute. He's not going to have a tie on. Okay, no problem, fine. So after I was with him for 20 minutes, we went into the big room, went down, introduced him to these old boys, and they were just ready for him. And one of them took one look at him and said, "Who are you?" And it was just a classic funny moment. Bill thought it was pretty funny as well. Did it deliberately. No, but you meet so many people in golf, and golf people are generally pretty nice to know, I find.
Yeah.
Privileged to work among them, with them, and for them, really. For all that time at the RNA, I was privileged to do the job, and nothing but happy memories, really.
Well, thank you for being so generous with your time, Peter, and talking us through so many of these brilliant stories, and just discussing with us some of the sort of big themes in the game, and who knows where it'll all end up, but it seems like it's in pretty good hands at the moment, and a lot of positive developments to look forward to. So thank you so much for
it's a pleasure. The game's in great hands, and there will always be issues, and it will always be developing, and that's why it's so interesting, and so many of us love it. I've enjoyed this morning. Thanks so much.
Words. Thanks, Pete.
Watch this.